Don't you dare sign that. My neighbor grabbed my wrist so hard I nearly dropped the pen. Her voice was barely above a whisper, but her eyes were wide with something I hadn't seen in them before. Fear. Harold, I need you to trust me. Walk away from that table right now and come with me. I looked at her. Then, I looked at my son, who was sitting across from me with a notary and a stack of papers that supposedly needed my signature before the end of the business day. My son, who I had taught to ride a bicycle in the driveway of this very house. My son, who had called me 2 weeks ago crying, saying he and his wife were in financial trouble and needed to move in temporarily. My son, who was now staring at my neighbor with an expression I had never seen on his face in 68 years of knowing him. It was not embarrassment. It was not surprise. It was calculation. I set the pen down. My name is Harold Mercer. I spent 31 years as a forensic accountant, the last 14 of them working fraud cases for the federal government before I retired. I have sat across tables from some of the most sophisticated financial criminals this country has ever produced. Men in $1,000 suits who looked you straight in the eye and lied so smoothly you almost believed them yourself. I know what deception looks like. I know the tells, the slight pauses, the over-rehearsed explanations, the papers positioned just so to discourage close reading. I am telling you this not to brag. I am telling you this because what happened next is something I am still not entirely sure I have made peace with. And I want you to understand that even a man who spent 3 decades finding fraud in other people's lives can be completely blind to it when it is sitting at his own kitchen table wearing his son's face. My wife, Patricia, passed 4 years ago. Pancreatic cancer. 12 weeks from diagnosis to the end, which the doctors said was fast, and which I can tell you felt like watching someone you love dissolve in slow motion. After she was gone, the house got very quiet. I kept busy the way retired people do gardening, reading, a woodworking class at the community center on Tuesday mornings, dinners twice a week with my neighbor Margaret Okafor, who had lived next door for 22 years and who had been one of Patricia's closest friends. My son, Derek, and his wife, Cassandra, lived about 40 minutes away in a newer subdivision. They visited on holidays and the occasional Sunday. Derek was 41, worked in commercial real estate, and had always been the kind of man who seemed to be doing well when you didn't look too carefully. Nice clothes, nice car, confident handshake. Cassandra was 38, worked in marketing, and had what I can only describe as a professional warmth, the kind that never quite reached her eyes but was always technically present. I had never disliked her. I had never fully trusted her either. But she made my son happy. Or at least, she made him appear happy, and I had long ago decided that was enough for me to work with. They called me on a Thursday evening in late September. Derek's voice had that strained quality I associated with the period right after Patricia died, when he was trying hard not to fall apart. He said things had gotten complicated. A commercial deal he had been working on for 2 years had collapsed. There were debts. He didn't want to go into all of it on the phone. Could they come see me that weekend? They came on Saturday. Cassandra sat with her hands folded on her knees and let Derek do the talking. He laid it out carefully. The deal collapse, the personal guarantees he had signed, the bank accounts that were not where they needed to be. They were going to lose the house. They needed somewhere to stay for a few months while they got back on their feet. Just temporary. They would cover their own expenses. They would not be a burden. I said yes. Of course I said yes. He was my son. They moved in the following Friday. The first 2 weeks were fine. Derek worked from the guest bedroom during the day. Cassandra cooked dinner sometimes, which I appreciated. They were quiet. They were polite. I told myself this was what family did. The third week, small things started to feel slightly off. I came downstairs one morning earlier than usual and found Cassandra at my desk, not her laptop, my desktop computer. She closed the browser window the moment she heard me on the stairs, but not before I caught a glimpse of what looked like a financial institution's login page. She said she had been looking for the printer settings. The printer was across the room, already on, already connected. I said nothing. I made coffee and I filed it away the way I had filed away 10,000 small anomalies in 31 years of professional life. You do not react to a single data point. You wait for a pattern. The pattern arrived within days. I noticed that certain mail I was expecting a quarterly statement from my investment account. A letter I had been waiting for from my attorney had not arrived. I mentioned it to Derek. He said mail had been slow lately. He said it with exactly the right amount of casual disinterest, which to anyone else would have been convincing. To me, it landed like a small alarm. I called the post office. There had been a mail forwarding request filed for my address 3 weeks earlier, forwarding to a P.O. box I did not recognize. I asked the post office to cancel it and say nothing about the call. Then I drove to my bank in person and requested a full transaction history for the past 60 days. There were 3 transactions I did not recognize. Small amounts, $40, $65, $22 drawn from an account I rarely touched. Test transactions. I knew exactly what they were. Someone was verifying access before moving on to something larger. I did not confront Derek. I did not change my behavior. I went home, made dinner, and watched the evening news with him and Cassandra, as if the afternoon had been entirely ordinary. That night, I could not sleep. I lay in the dark in the bedroom I had shared with Patricia for 38 years, and I thought about what I was going to do, not about what I had found. I already knew what I had found. I thought about the fact that my son was in the next room, and that I did not know yet how deep this went, and that I needed to know the full shape of it before I made a single move. Because if I confronted him now, the evidence would disappear, and whatever legal protection I needed would depend entirely on documentation I did not yet have. I had spent my career proving that patience is a more powerful weapon than confrontation. I was going to have to apply that lesson to my own family. The following Monday, I called my attorney. I did not call from the house. I drove to a gas station 3 miles away and used my cell phone. I told her what I had found and what I suspected. She listened without interrupting, which is one of the many reasons I had trusted her for 15 years. She said to document everything and not to sign anything without calling her first. She also said something that I have thought about many times since. She said, "Harold, I need you to understand that whatever we find, the criminal side and the civil side are going to be 2 separate roads. Make sure you know which one you want to walk before we start." I told her I wanted both. The next piece fell into place through Margaret. She had stopped by that Wednesday afternoon while Derek and Cassandra were both out. We had coffee on the back porch, the way we always did, and after a while she set her cup down and looked at me with the expression she usually reserved for serious conversations. She said she had to tell me something and she needed me to really listen before I reacted. She told me that the previous week, while I had been at my woodworking class, she had seen a car she didn't recognize in my driveway. A man she had never seen before had gone inside with Derek and stayed for about 45 minutes. She had thought nothing of it at the time. But then, 2 days later, she had run into one of our other neighbors, a retired physician named Dr. Ellen Prentice, who lived at the end of the block. And Dr. Prentice had mentioned, almost in passing, that she'd been surprised to see Derek at the clinic where Dr. Prentice occasionally filled in, because when she'd said hello to him in the parking lot, he had been walking out with a physician named Dr. Conrad Sales, who had a reputation in local medical circles that was, as she put it, less than sterling. Dr. Sales had lost hospital privileges at 2 area hospitals in the past decade. He maintained a private practice that was widely believed to be the kind of practice that operated in the gray area between medicine and whatever people needed medicine to say. I kept my voice very steady. I asked Margaret what she thought it meant. She said she thought it meant someone was planning to have me declared mentally incompetent. The word landed in the air between us and sat there. I had seen it before, not personally, but professionally, in the financial fraud cases that often ran alongside estate manipulation. It was more common than most people realized. An elderly parent, living alone, a child with access to the house, and the mail, and the computer, a cooperative physician, willing to provide documentation, and then a quiet legal process that stripped the parent of the right to manage their own affairs and handed control of their assets to a court-appointed guardian who was, in many cases, the child making the request. It was elegant, in the way that the worst kinds of fraud are always elegant. And it was exactly the kind of thing I would have caught in someone else's finances with 3 days and a subpoena. I had not caught it in my own house, because I had not been looking for it. I had opened my door to my son and turned off the part of my brain that had kept me employed and effective for 30 years, because that part of my brain was incompatible with being a father. That was the moment that hurt the most. Not the fraud. The fact that I had turned myself off for him. Margaret was watching me with an expression I recognized as barely contained anger on my behalf. I told her what I needed from her. I needed her to continue as if nothing had changed. I needed her to let me know if she saw that car again. And I needed her to trust me when I said that I was going to handle this the right way, which meant carefully and legally and completely. She said, "Harold, I have known you for 22 years. I am not worried about carefully. I am worried about you." I told her not to be. That was a partial lie. Over the next 8 days, I moved with the kind of focused quiet that I had not used since my last year before retirement. I contacted my investment firm directly and had my statements redirected to a new email address Derek did not know about. I made an appointment with a neurologist, not because I needed one, but because I wanted documentation of my cognitive baseline from a physician with no connection to Conrad Sales. The neurologist, a woman named Dr. Anita Sharma, spent an hour with me and told me my cognition was entirely normal for a man of any age, let alone 68. I asked her to put that in writing with as much specificity as possible. She looked at me curiously and said she would. I also contacted a private investigator named Frank Hollis, who had done work for my firm during my final years of employment and whom I trusted absolutely. I told him what I needed. He said he would be discreet. He was not cheap, but he was good, and good was what I needed. Frank came back to me within 5 days with documentation I had not anticipated finding so quickly. Conrad Sales had filed a preliminary evaluation report with a local attorney's office, not my attorney, a different one that specialized in guardianship proceedings. The report described a patient matching my description, identified only by initials, with what it characterized as early-stage cognitive decline, diminished capacity for financial decision-making, and increasing dependency on family support. It was a careful document. It was also, as far as I could determine, almost entirely fabricated. Sales had never examined me. He had apparently been paid to produce a report based on information provided to him by someone else. Frank also told me about the P.O. box. It was registered in Cassandra's name. The mail that had been diverted there included 3 months of financial statements showing the full picture of my assets, something Derek would have needed in order to calculate exactly what was worth the effort. I had a number now. The total value of the estate they were trying to position themselves to control was just over $1.4 million, including the house, the investment accounts, and the proceeds from Patricia's life insurance that I had never touched because I couldn't bring myself to think of her death as an asset. $1.4 million. That was the price of my son. I sat with that for a long time. My attorney, when I called her, said the documentation Frank had gathered was more than sufficient to pursue criminal charges, including elder financial abuse, conspiracy to commit fraud, and conspiracy to file false medical documentation. She also said that a civil proceeding to establish the full scope of the financial manipulation would take longer, but that the criminal side could move faster than I might expect if I was willing to cooperate with the county district attorney's office. I told her I wanted to do both, in the right order, and that I had one more piece I needed to put into place first, the signing appointment. I had found out about it by accident. Frank intercepted a voicemail that had been left on a secondary line in the house, a line I rarely checked, which I suspected Derek had known from the guardianship attorney's office, confirming a notarization appointment. The voicemail referenced documents that would need my signature to initiate a voluntary financial management agreement, which sounds innocuous but is, in practice, the first legal step in transferring control of someone's assets to another party. I did not call back. I let Derek tell me about the appointment himself, which he did 2 days later, framing it as a routine financial planning meeting that his own financial advisor had recommended. He said it was just some paperwork to make sure everything was organized in case anything ever happened to me. He said it with the smooth confidence of someone who had rehearsed it enough times that it no longer sounded rehearsed. I said that sounded sensible. I said I would be there. I called Margaret that evening. I told her about the appointment. I told her what I needed her to do. She listened without saying a single word, and when I finished, she said, "You are the most frightening, calm person I have ever met in my life." I told her I had had a lot of practice. The morning of the appointment, I called my attorney and told her the meeting was that afternoon. She said the district attorney's office had already been briefed and was ready to move the moment I confirmed what was in the documents. Frank was going to be parked down the street. I did not tell Derek or Cassandra that any of this was happening. I made breakfast. I read the newspaper. I asked Derek if he wanted more coffee, and he said yes, and I poured it for him and watched him drink it at my kitchen table while he looked at his phone. The notary arrived at 2 o'clock. She had a pleasant face and a large bag, and the particular brisk efficiency of someone who does this kind of work many times a week and doesn't think much about the specifics of any particular appointment. The documents were already printed and arranged on the kitchen table. Cassandra sat off to one side, just inside my peripheral vision, not quite part of the scene, but not outside it either. I sat down. The notary began explaining the documents in the kind of simplified language people use when they have been told the subject has difficulty understanding complex material. That detail told me everything I needed to know about what Sales's report had said. Derek uncapped a pen and set it in front of me. I heard the front door open. Margaret walked into the kitchen with the direct purposefulness of a woman who had decided exactly what she was going to do and had no intention of being talked out of it. She crossed the room in about 4 steps, put her hand around my wrist, and said what she said. "Don't you dare sign that." The room went very still. Derek said her name in a tone that was meant to sound surprised, but contained too much edge to fully achieve it. Cassandra's expression did not change at all, which was in some ways more alarming than if it had. The notary looked between all of us with the expression of someone who has suddenly realized she is in the middle of something that has nothing to do with document processing. I set the pen down. I pushed my chair back. I stood up. I said, "I think we should stop here." Derek said, "Dad, this is just paperwork. This is nothing. Margaret doesn't understand what—" I said, "Derek, I need you to stop talking. I do not raise my voice. I learned a long time ago that a quiet voice in a tense room is more arresting than a loud one." The room went still again. I told the notary that I was not going to be signing anything that day, that I appreciated her time, and that she was welcome to leave. She gathered her bag with the practiced neutrality of a professional who has learned to exit gracefully from domestic situations and was out the door inside of 90 seconds. Then I looked at my son. I told him that I knew about the P.O. box. I told him I knew about Conrad's sales and the evaluation report that Sales had filed without ever examining me. I told him I knew about the test transactions on my bank account and the mail forwarding request. I told him I knew about the guardianship attorney and the nature of the documents that had just been sitting on my kitchen table. I watched his face move through several expressions in rapid succession: denial, then recalculation, then something that looked briefly like shame, and then, faster than I expected, a particular blankness that I recognized as the face people put on when they have decided to try a different strategy. He said I was misunderstanding. He said I was confused. He said that this was exactly the kind of thing the evaluation was meant to address. I said, "Derek, I have the neurologist's report from Dr. Anita Sharma dated 11 days ago. I have a full transaction history documenting unauthorized access to my account. I have the sales report, the correspondence with the guardianship attorney, and I have a private investigator who has documented every step of this since the beginning of October. My own attorney is aware of all of it, and I made a call this morning that I think you are going to find very significant." Cassandra stood up. She said this was insane. She said I was doing this out of spite. She said they had come here to help me, and this was what they got. I looked at her for a moment. Then I said, "The district attorney's office will be in contact with you both within 48 hours. Derek said nothing for a very long time. He stood in my kitchen where he had eaten cereal as a child and done homework at the table and helped me build a birdhouse one summer when he was 9 years old. And he looked at me with an expression I do not have a clean word for. It was not quite guilt. It was not quite anger. It was something closer to the face of a person who has been gambling with something they cannot afford to lose, and has just heard the number come up wrong. He said, "I didn't think you'd actually do this." I said, "I know." I asked them both to be out of the house by the following morning. I told them that anything they left after that would be considered abandoned property. I did not yell. I did not threaten anything beyond what I had already told them. I walked to the front door and opened it, and after a moment, they both went past me and out, and I closed the door behind them. Margaret was still standing in my kitchen. She had her arms crossed and was watching me with an expression that I think was trying to be steady, but had some water in it around the edges. She said, "Are you all right?" I told her I didn't know yet. I told her I thought I would be. She put a pot of coffee on, and we sat at the kitchen table where the documents had been 30 minutes earlier, and we didn't talk much, and that was exactly right. The legal process moved in the way legal processes do, not quickly, but with a momentum that once started does not stop. My attorney filed the criminal complaint the following week. The district attorney's office took the case seriously, partly because the documentation was thorough, and partly because elder financial fraud had become a prosecutorial priority in our county after a series of high-profile cases the previous year. Derek was charged with conspiracy to commit elder financial abuse, fraud, and tampering with mail. Cassandra was charged with the same counts, plus identity fraud, related to the P.O. box. Conrad Sales was reported to the State Medical Board, which opened a formal investigation. He was also charged with filing a fraudulent medical evaluation, which carries its own criminal weight. The trial took 8 months to complete. I testified. I sat in the witness stand and answered every question carefully and completely, and I did not look at my son while I was speaking because I had decided in advance that looking at him would not help either of us. Derek was convicted on all counts and sentenced to 22 months in a minimum security facility, with an additional 2 years of supervised probation and mandatory financial restitution. Cassandra received 18 months plus probation. Sales lost his medical license and received a suspended sentence with significant community service requirements, which I found less satisfying than I might have. But the medical board's action was, in practical terms, the more meaningful punishment for a man whose livelihood depended on being a physician. On the day Derek was sentenced, I drove home and sat in the driveway for a while before going inside. I thought about the 9-year-old who had stood next to me in the garage with sawdust on his shoes, handing me nails one at a time with the serious concentration of a boy who wanted to do it right. I do not know at what point the man became someone capable of doing what he did. I am not sure that question has an answer, or that finding one would change anything. What I know is this. I know that I did not manufacture the situation. I did not trick anyone, or use anything except the truth. Every piece of evidence I gathered was real. Every step I took was legal. I gave my son and his wife the opportunity to leave quietly before the legal machinery fully engaged, and they had already set that machinery in motion long before I learned it existed. I also know that grief makes people vulnerable in ways they do not fully recognize. After Patricia died, I closed down part of myself because that part hurt too much to keep open, the part that was professionally skeptical, the part that asked hard questions. I told myself I was healing, that I was trusting my family the way a father should. What I was actually doing was leaving a door unlocked that I would have kept bolted in any other context. I don't say that to be harsh with myself. I say it because it's true, and because the truth is the only thing worth carrying out of an experience like this. Margaret came for dinner on a Friday, about 2 months after the sentencing. We sat on the back porch until past 9 o'clock, which we didn't usually do in November, but there were blankets and hot tea, and neither of us seemed to want to go inside yet. She asked me whether I ever thought about reaching out to Derek. I told her I thought about it most days. I told her I hadn't decided yet what I would do when he was out. She said that was probably the honest answer. I told her she had saved me a great deal of trouble, and possibly the house, by walking through that door when she did. She said I would have figured it out anyway, and I said maybe, but having her there had changed the geometry of the room in a way that made the next step easier to take. She thought about that for a moment and said she supposed that was what neighbors were for. I still live in this house. The same house Patricia and I bought the year Derek was born. The year I started my career. The year I was 33 years old and could not have imagined being 68 or any of the things that 68 would turn out to contain. The garden is doing well. I'm back at the woodworking class on Tuesday mornings. I rebuilt the birdhouse last spring because the old one had weathered past usefulness, and there are now 2 chickadees that treat it as though it has always been there. I am not going to tell you I am at peace with what happened. Peace is a process, not a destination, and I am still in the middle of it. But I will tell you that my finances are intact, my mind is intact, and my ability to make my own decisions, which is, when you reduce it to its core, what this was always about, is entirely intact. They thought I was old. They thought old meant diminished. They had known me my entire life, and still had managed to confuse the quiet I had earned with the quiet of someone who has stopped paying attention. I have never stopped paying attention. I have just gotten better at not showing it. That, I suppose, is what 31 years of finding the truth in other people's numbers will do for you. The patterns don't stop being visible just because you retire. They don't stop being visible just because the person sitting across the table is someone you love. They don't stop being visible at all.